we're here talking a lot about the impact of the internet and mobile phones on the broadcast business, and a lot of that discussion is about pumping content out to them. But a lot of the technology that's come from internet, mobile phones, etc., has changed the way broadcasters get content back to the station in the first place. And we have a bunch of news gathering experts here. We're going to talk about the latest tools in field reporting and collaboration and transmission. And so without further ado, I'll get right into the panel. Starting from my left is Fabian Westerwelle. He's Director of News Acquisition for ABC News. To his left is Keith Barbaria. He's VP of Technology and Operations for NBC Boston, Telemundo, and New England Cable News. And then we have Rick Wheeler, who's Eastern Region VP of Engineering for Fox television stations. And everyone's probably had a busy morning up to this point based on what's happening in New York today, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But starting off, and I'll pose this question to Fabian first. Can you talk about the mix of contribution technology that you use today? Looking at tools, traditional microwave, traditional satellite, traditional fiber, and then new technologies like bonded cellular, IP satellite, public internet, and how that compares to 10 years ago.
Yeah, so for us, of course, we're covering news really globally, and it's extremely important to get to places very quickly. And
hang on, is his mic on?
Now it is.
There we go.
I hear it.
Okay, great.
So yeah, for the network news coverage for us, we're covering news globally, of course. So for us, ease of use and portability is extremely important to be able to get the stories quickly and cover them. So for us, the landscape of what we use to cover news has drastically changed in the last 5 years or so. So now we're actually to a point where 90% or more of what we do is public internet contribution, and that's a mix between about 67% or so bonded cellular, and the rest is fixed installation IP encoders that all are running via the public internet. Of course, we still do some satellite as well. Like I said, 90% is public IP, so the rest is 10%, a kind of a mixture between fiber and KU. And it's traditional KU because for us, really IP via KU is something that's interesting. We'd love to get to a point where our satellite trucks, vendor and our own trucks, are really just big public internet connections. But transitioning right now to that is not necessarily the biggest priority just because it is such a small percentage of what we really do. So the KA part of it, I think you mentioned that as well. We're still exploring that. It kind of fits into that same category. So if it's just 5% of what we're doing, not a big area that we're really going to be concentrating on. And yeah, I think that's about it as far as kind of the mixture of solutions.
And we'll go into further detail on how that's changed your workflow and the implications of training and everything else. But same basic question to Keith. Up in New England, what's your split of different contribution technologies?
I think for the whole station group over the last 5 or 6 years, it's not just been in New England. We've integrated all these technologies together. Every truck we build now, every complement of equipment for the crews contains all of it to be flexible and agile in the field. If you look at covering, we'll stay with New England, a blizzard in New England, there would be a point of that storm where you could not be live. You were doing phoners, tucked away in a truck someplace waiting to shovel yourself out. Now with cell bonded, you're able to stay live all night long. I'm not sure the field crews actually like that part of it, but the coverage of those types of events have changed totally just in the last 5 years. And then an event like we saw this morning here in New York, where you're able to be live using all those different types of technology, no matter what the conditions are. You can get close to the action if you have to stay far away, satellite, IP satellite, and then that advantage of having that IP network where you're working. Since we just heard a whole panel on social media and user-generated content and getting content back to the station faster, breaking news, you need that IP connectivity, and if you can do that for yourself at the truck, that's a huge advantage.
If you, just to follow up, if you had to put a percentage on it, what percentage of your feeds would you say still go, at the local station level, are still traditional microwave?
Well, I think it depends on the market and how well your microwave network is built out. Speaking for us at NBC Boston, we didn't have a traditional microwave network that we could rely on, so we're very heavy on cell bonded and KA right now. We're exploring KU IP as well. But then, I think the way cell bonded changed news gathering, I think it kind of woke up that traditional microwave as well, and those vendors are making changes now to create the same types of workflow you see on cell bonded. So we're looking at and reinvesting in our microwave networks to change them to IP networks to, again, create that pipe, that bandwidth at the truck. And it's not just transmitting video anymore, it's return video, it's prompter, it's connecting voice over IP phones all at your truck on your own bandwidth, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and where the BAS spectrum goes forward is something we're going to tackle a little more depth later on. Rick, same question to you. What's the mix, and maybe you can give a little color on what was the mix this morning as you reported on the events here in New York.
Sure. So the mix for the Fox television station group is much the same in that. And it does vary from market to market. I think the aggregate of all 16 stations is probably 70-30 in favor of bonded over traditional microwave and satellite. So we actually have one market without any kind of microwave infrastructure whatsoever. So they're all completely bonded cellular. He does have a KA truck there where he's doing an IP backfill. So I think, like I said, it's probably a good 70-30 mix between all the stations themselves. So, and then this morning, just for NYW here, I think I had one live truck out on the street where it was actually microwave, and everything else was all bonded cellular. So we had 5 backpacks out in the field at the time, 3 of them fired up at any one point with live pictures feeding into the station. So,
When did you first start playing around with the backpack technology, and how is the reliability of that improved? At what point did it become very reliable between the encoding technology getting better and then just coverage, new technologies like LTE for the actual transmission? When did it become something that was an everyday tool for you? And I'll pose that to the other panelists after you.
So for us, I'd say probably about 4 to 5 years ago was when we really first started playing around with bonded cellular. For us, we were looking for a way to cut down the overall capital costs that we were outlaying for traditional microwave satellite trucks. Back in the day, you were spending, plus $300,000 for each one of those trucks. We were looking for something that, again, was going to be, less expensive cost of ownership. Something that, again, would give us the portability and agility that, quite frankly, the trucks could not give us back then. So like I said, it was about 5 years ago. And again, look, back in the day, it was a rough start with some of that equipment as well. Certainly the codecs have gotten so much better, over the last several years. But like I said, it gave us the ability to start working in an IP world, almost immediately, something that we really hadn't done back then.
Keith, maybe you can talk a little bit, when it became an everyday tool for you, and then you mentioned before the biggest benefit of it was just the workflow change, which Rick mentioned as well. Can you talk about how that rolled out over a couple-year period?
Yeah, I think the timing's basically the same, maybe a couple of years earlier, and the drivers were the same. 2008, 2009, tough years for broadcasting. It was hard to get new trucks approved. It was hard to find the money to maintain trucks. So the cell bonded packs were a way to back up your trucks or even extend your fleet. If you had a fleet of 15, you had 5 packs, it was like having 20 trucks out in the field. So that was, very attractive, and it was a rough go at start. I'd say when we touched on the technology, it was more of take this backpack with your truck in case you can't see your microwave tower. If your truck fails, you can get on with the backpack. Or, it's breaking news. We absolutely have no other way possible to get a live shot, so we'll try this. And it took a while to convince newsrooms and news directors to take the risk or put up with the on-air issues we were seeing with the backpacks, but we pushed because we knew the technology was only going to get better. with the NBC station group, we partnered hard with a couple of the vendors to continue to develop the product. First, to shore it up, giving them some deliverables. At least don't let it go to black. At least keep the picture up. Audio only. How do we get some continuity going? And then as the technology started catching up, it became more reliable. And now, those packs don't go out as backups to trucks. They are out there. Sometimes it's the only method a crew brings with them reliably every day, 2, 3, 4 live shots a day.
Does that, when you step back from it, does that surprise you? That it's become that reliable? Because I remember writing about this stuff 10 years ago when people were first playing around with it, and there were a lot of skeptical technical operations and engineers, that this was actually, you weren't going to have the contention issues and too many people trying to stream at once, and you're going to be able to have a live shot that way.
I don't know about surprise. I mean, I'm happy it worked out the way we had hoped. I think, satellite interviews were also a thing people didn't think would work with 3-4 second delays. How are we going to put up with this? And yeah, I think that's how we viewed the backpacks. Let's deal with some early pain and push this technology and develop it so it'll become the tool that is as useful as we see it now.
Fabian, maybe you can talk about the early days of it, and particularly speak about some of the training involved with using the new tools, people getting comfortable with it, and then maybe going too much in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is right. Every time there's a new technology, there's going to be some hesitancy about adopting it and it having to prove itself, which of course was a big factor for us as well. We worked with TVNewsCheck is our bonded solution for the network side, so we've worked very closely with them over the years, and that was a very important part of it. For the training, I think getting the shows that we have to buy into it was, of course, a big part of it. That just evolved as we kept using the technology more and more often. And now, I can touch on the training a little bit more, but I think what's interesting is that we've gotten to a point now where the producers that are out in the field with these devices are so comfortable with it that they're too comfortable with it, right? So when they just expect it to work, because most of the time it does. They show up at the location, they turn it on, and they're live. And that's what we want, but of course we know, as you mentioned, there's contention issues from time to time. There are potentially other technical issues from time to time. So that step that you usually would take with a crew or a satellite truck operator or a microwave operator, where they're dedicated to troubleshooting those issues, is really what we've now had to concentrate on in training, to get people to slow down a little bit, show up a little bit earlier to their live shots. And what I'm talking about is producers, really, who are taking on this burden right now. So that's been a discussion. But that's really a good thing, really, because it is so reliable. The other factor is that it, of course, gives the producers a lot of flexibility. They can go to locations we never used to be able to access, and be live from there, even internationally. And for us, we do a decent amount of international coverage. So, for example, the Mexican earthquake that happened a few months ago, we were live right from the scene of that collapsed school that we were covering for several days. And we wouldn't have been able to do that internationally or even domestically in many situations without that technology. And I think the other thing to say is, for the hurricanes that we covered just a couple months ago as well, we stayed up during the hurricane making landfall, pretty much both hurricanes in all our locations, which with satellite we would not have been able to do either. So, yeah.
Thanks. Keith, can you talk about training a little bit and getting people comfortable? And one of the things when you talk to the vendors, they all emphasize the point that these are basically one-button devices compared to setting up a traditional satellite link or setting up a microwave mast. And maybe you can talk in a little detail about that.
Yeah, I think the training piece is an advantage to the technology. The field crews that we see now are less experienced. The truck operators used to be traditional broadcast engineers, and that's not what we see anymore. So any chance to simplify the technology in the field helps. So to give a photographer or a multimedia journalist a backpack and say, here, turn it on, and that's all you have to worry about. We'll deal with everything else on the back end. So in your ingest and receive area, you're dealing with latency, you're dealing with all the technology piece. I think that's a huge advantage as far as the technology goes.
Rick, can you talk a little bit about the different people who are using these tools in the field and what that and that sort of it comes to the issue of cost. I think when we were talking about this, we said one of the things with bonded is that you take away CapEx and you replace it with OpEx. And I wrote a story about this a little while ago, and talking to groups about trying to rein in their data costs because these things are so easy to use. There's a little bit of devil in the details, or lack of them. They're too easy sometimes for people to use. Can you describe that?
As far as the costs?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, when we talk about, it's funny because a lot of us up here, we have to kind of wear two different hats. You've got the technology that you're responsible for, and always, trying to make sure that the newsroom has the tools that they need, staying on the cutting edge with a lot of those tools as they're being developed. But look, we have to be fiscally responsible as well, right? So at the end of the day, if I'm going to buy a live truck, it's going to cost me $300,000 on average. I'm going to keep that asset for 5 to 7 years. So I have a depreciation value. I know what my cost of ownership is. With these packs here, I mean, again, it's almost like one pack per truck. I got a crew with a pack. Now I've got a much smaller vehicle for them. And again, I think Keith mentioned that most all the trucks that we build nowadays, we're putting we're putting bonded cellular encoders in these vehicles now. Most of my markets don't even build microwave trucks any longer. But again, a cost of ownership for a pack, plus a receiver or a decoder back at the station side, and then when you start looking at data costs, I mean, again, that asset and what it's going to cost for me to run that over the period of 5 to 7 years is a fraction of what a CapEx outlay for a vehicle is. However, there's a different formula for CapEx versus OpEx. And so again, I save money on the CapEx side, but now I got the finance guys going, well, wait a minute, but now my OpEx line is a lot higher. So that's the conflict for us nowadays. And so now we're starting to look for ways where I can actually own that. Instead of buying data from somebody else, I want to own it outright. So that's where you started to get into the mesh network of things that we've been working with as well.
We used to be really disciplined at booking satellite time, 5-minute windows, keep those costs down, and the convenience of turning it on and transmitting got away from us. And crews get on site, they turn that button on, and you're streaming bars for 7 hours, and you're doing a half-hour live shot, and you get your bill at the end of the month for $300,000 in data. You're like, wait a second, let's go back to satellite. So it's caused us to relook at our workflows and SOPs and start changing the behavior back at the station to manage the transmission of the packs more like we used to with satellite, to rein in those costs, but then also to look at other technologies again, which hopefully push the data cost to come down from the vendors, but looking at mesh networks and vendors like Vislink to say, hey, how do we use our own bandwidth and get these same features?
And I'm going to pose this question to Fabian too, but what are some of the tools? There are some new tools from the IP contribution vendors that help you manage them a little bit, right? Don't you have some remote management capabilities now that you didn't have in the early days? And you talk about how those work. I know they're relatively new.
Sure. And the NBC station group, we deal mostly with LiveView and Degero, and both offer a user interface at the house to go over to look at all those things, your usage, to manage the system back at the house. It's very intuitive and very easy to use. Web portals you can access from anywhere. So the tools are there. I think they've done a good job working with us and delivering a product that does what we ask. It's now on us to change our behaviors and actually use those tools to manage the costs. The tools are available and they're very good.
Fabian, how do you manage, considering you do so much of your feeds through bonded, how do you manage data costs at ABC?
So we take a little bit of a different approach than some others. We actually own all of our own SIM cards. We don't rent through the bonded cellular providers. So that comes obviously with the downside of having to manage all of those individual lines and accounts, and that can get a little tricky. But we set up a pretty good team of people that are able to manage that, very small team. And the advantage we also have is that we're one news organization that can keep track of our packs in a pretty straightforward way. It's not like a station group where you have dozens of stations potentially that all have to manage their own SIM cards. So that has helped us keep costs down a little bit because we've been able to make some decent deals with the providers directly. And I think the other thing to say is that a lot of the cost savings have been realized already, right, with this technology. So we're certainly spending less money than we did with satellite, even with those bandwidth costs factored in. And now it's really about innovation and trying to figure out what else we can do. So in this morning for the terror story, we were there, of course, with Bonded Solutions, but the first thing that actually appeared on the air was Gio Benitez live via a Live View app on the iPhone. So they were just separated from their other team. Their bonded backpack didn't make it to them. So the producer just did the live shot on an iPhone. And that's something we're really concentrating on as well, to kind of move past bonded in some sense in the next several years, trying to outfit our news gathering equipment really and base it on a phone. ESPN has done a lot of work on that as well, and they're doing a lot of contribution that way at this point. So
I think that's a big difference. The original packs needed 6 air cards,
right,
3 different carriers. They can switch between the 3. Now you're doing this off of 1 card or 1 phone. It's progressed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right, and I think early on we were talking about, were we surprised by the advancement of a lot of this? And I think from our perspective, we expected it. We expected this stuff to get better. I mean, it was a great concept when we first heard about it as well. But then in partnering with a lot of these vendors, we've had so many meetings, and we've invested an incredible amount of money in them as well. So quite frankly, we expected this stuff to advance the way that it has. And look, I mean, the codecs are so much better nowadays than they were even 5 years ago. I mean, the picture quality, you would have no idea that it's on a backpack. And it's getting that way with the phones now as well. I mean, you have no idea that these guys are on a phone. And so, and I think in the early days when we first started doing this, and you had some of the older packs, I think at first in some of the stations it was very hard for the newsroom to really want to put something on the air that wasn't high definition quality. But then when we ended up with contribution from viewers, on phones and things like that, and look, and it wasn't pristine, but they were first responders, we'll put that on the air. Right. That kind of got the newsroom a little bit, more, susceptible to wanting to do, those kinds of things within their newscast as well. So that was kind of the first step for us. But, again, these technologies have gotten so much better, over the last couple of years. And again, quite frankly, we expected it.
Do you, how do you use, since bonded does work so well in so many of your markets, how do you use KA band across the group? Is that just something that's in a truck as a backstop if you have contention issues, or maybe if you're in a remote location where there aren't a lot of cell towers and you don't have great coverage? But I mean, can you talk about that? There are a couple of markets where you actually do use KA regularly.
Yeah, so I've got one market that's almost exclusively KA, because they're kind of out in the sticks, and you don't have a whole lot of cell towers out there either. So, I mean, essentially, we're taking that KA downlink. I mean, it's just IP, and so we're actually backfilling. You're kind of turning that vehicle into one big hotspot by doing that. So we've got wireless technology mounted on the truck as well that will connect to these packs. So you've kind of got a giant hotspot there. And again, the nice thing is that I'm not tethering cameras to this vehicle now either. They'll tether to a camera. The camera is connecting just by Wi-Fi to the vehicle itself. The vehicle has got all of that IP aggregation within the vehicle itself. So that's kind of how we use the IP.
It's a combination for us. I have 3 trucks at the station now that are KA IP only. So they go out cell bonded with the roof antennas extending the coverage primarily, and where there's a gap in the cell coverage, they'll deploy the antenna, make the connection, and that bonds them together and gives you the bandwidth you need for the live shot. In the station group, we're also building different vehicles. We're looking at weather chasers or smaller, agile, like Jeep style trucks that can get us into breaking news and through the storm. And in those smaller platforms, you need to use a smaller KA dish and just stay cell bonded. And now that it's become so reliable, we're able to build live trucks on any platform, really.
Yeah. And there was a new Jeep up in Hartford.
Yeah, the Snow Monster. Hartford's been known for its trucks. So they did a pickup truck. They did a first alert weather Jeep, and now they have the Snow Monster Jeep. It takes on a life of its own. The Jeep itself becomes a character. It's got a Twitter handle. People follow it, but at the same time, it's a commitment to the market, to the viewers, to know that as a station, we're going to be there no matter what the conditions.
Fabian, do you have any insights on KA? I know it's not something that the network uses, but
yeah,
station level.
Yeah, the network, we don't really do a lot of KA. Like I said earlier, we do very little satellite now anyway, so it's not really something we've invested in. Our station group, the ONOs, do have some KA, and they're using that effectively. And it's very similar to what you already described, which is great. And then the other thing that on the network side we're constantly looking at is small flyaway dishes. You know, for us, it's important to be able to get to places. It could be anywhere in the world very quickly. So currently, very much looking more and more into those solutions, both on the KU and KA side.
Several of our panelists mentioned mesh networks and mentioned trying to get a true IP workflow on traditional E&G channels. Can you talk about where you're at with your to the extent you still have a microwave infrastructure, where that's at? I know you talk to some groups, they say we use our microwave every day, but we have digital microwave gear that we invested in 10, 12 years ago when we did the relocation. That stuff's getting long in the tooth. We don't know if we just want to buy the newest version of the same thing or do something totally different. And maybe you can talk about what to date, what you've experimented with that will work in the BAS spectrum and maybe give you some of the same kind of flexibility that bonded does. Rick?
Yeah, so the BAS spectrum for us, that's really where it's all about, right? Certainly we have had a lot of experience with a couple of the manufacturers that are out there. We've worked in S-band, we've worked in some of the unlicensed 5.8. And again, the S-band is, we've had some challenges, getting that stuff licensed. We've had, obviously the unlicensed versions of those as well. We've had a lot of problems with interference. So look, at the end of the day, I own a 2 gig license, so I have the right to operate in that band. I'm protected. So we want those, we want modulators that are going to work in that band for us. So one of the manufacturers that we work with are already set up and they're ready to go. Another one that we like, just in terms of the partnership that we have with them, they're almost there. They're testing that now. We did some testing here a couple of weeks ago, and I think we're awfully close. But again, that gets back to, look, I've got portability and I've got agility, and now I own it. Now I'm not paying, whether you own the air cards or not, I'm not paying, AT&T, Sprint, right, Verizon for all of that bandwidth. Now, look, I've got it in the station, right? I can get it out to each one of my receive sites. Essentially, I'm kind of pushing what I already have from the station back out to the field instead of paying somebody else for it.
Keith, to what extent have you guys experimented with the next generation of BAS technology?
Yeah, I think we're in the middle of it now. We've been working with IMT VisLink on their NewsNet product, it's been, I think, beneficial to both. We're learning what works and what doesn't, and we've started using it now with our station helicopter, and we'll hope to expand on it next year. What we're looking for are the features that come with it, not just a more reliable signal, but to be able to do all the other things you can on your new connection, which would be, like I said before, return video or sending prompter out to the truck. In a long-term breaking news or a story that has legs, you have 3 or 4 trucks on site. You can set up a voice over IP network to connect the trucks back to the station. It kind of changes the game for those long-term coverage or sporting events coverage type of stuff. As long as you can see your tower, I think it's great that you can use your bandwidth to get the same features you would get over cell-bonded technology.
Fabian, is there anything the ABC is doing? I know that's not your purview, but is there anything they're playing with that looks promising?
Yeah, nothing specific. I mean, again, right, we don't own a lot of spectrum ourselves that we're not already utilizing for some of the distribution purposes, obviously. So other than that, in the local markets that we're working from a national perspective, it's really the biggest market is DC, Washington, DC. And so we're looking at some options there, but it's very minimal. The nice thing about DC for us is that it's very well wired, and we have a great dark fiber network that all the networks share there. So all of the political coverage, which obviously right now there's a lot of, is very well served with that. But what we are really interested in is, of course, 5G on the cellular side. So we're working with Verizon on that and really trying to partner with all the folks involved with that technology. That's, to us, obviously the biggest next step, especially as we move forward in the world of doing everything on an iPhone, or having cameras that have integrated transmission capabilities. And that also touches on, of course, the workflow improvements we're trying to create in a world where we have to serve all these different platforms. I know this is not that panel, but just following up from the previous one, being able to get content in from anywhere where in the world, and have that metadata that comes along with that, and the assignment of that camera to whatever story that the camera, for example, is working on is extremely valuable. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to work with the cellular providers on, and also our bonded cellular solution partners.
Going back to the BAS, so there's a couple different technologies that broadcasters are experimenting with, a couple different vendors. You have the traditional idea you think about, transmitting from a truck back to the station using your ENG channels. And then there's a couple companies who have mesh network technology, which may not be for that exact application, but maybe it's from the camera back to the truck, particularly in a big venue. I believe Fox has played around with some of this stuff at the Super Bowl, and there's some tests going here in New York. Rick, can you just give sort of a layman's explanation of how mesh works and what you think of that as a potential news gathering tool down the road?
Yeah, so look, I think it allows, like bonded cellular. I mean, again, you're not tethered to any one vehicle, right? I mean, basically, what you've got, kind of a radio. It's a two-way radio, basically, and you've got a node that's set up. That node's got an IP feed going to it. That's kind of your hop to the internet right there. So the radio itself is connecting to that node, either over, S-band. For us, we would rather have BAS at that point, but then you're just using bandwidth at that point. So the bandwidth is obviously coming from the node. Everything is leading back to the station once the node receives that. But for us, the mesh, because now I'm not working with an aggregate of, say, 7 to 12 megabits that you might with a bonded cellular unit. Now I've got a heck of a lot more bandwidth in there that I can share between that mesh network radio and a node, as an example. So I think Keith touched on it earlier. So now not only do I have video, going back and forth, high definition, but now I've got return video, low latency. So we all know what that is, once we move to digital transmitters, and how latent that video can actually be. So now I can take it directly out of a control room and send that out to the field with very minimal latency. We've got two-way radio we can put on these channels now as well. I've got prompter I can put on them. So you've got all of these extra, back and forth channels that you within the mesh radios themselves that again, come your way because of the increased bandwidth that we're using, that those systems provide.
How far away do you think that is to being an everyday tool for a call letter station?
Some of my markets are using it every day now. They've been using it for years. And so, look, and some of it is, some of it is all persistent, as an example. Some of it is all, some of it is, I've got vehicles out there that are using PEP links for a lot of this stuff as well. So what we've done is we've gone into some of our markets where we know that we're constantly doing live shots over and over. I mean, the UN down here is a good example of that. We know that when those guys are in town, we're going to be down there quite often. There'll be crews down there every single day. So those are great spots to set some of this stuff up. I'll let somebody else go.
I think cost is an issue as far as timing goes. It's not inexpensive to upgrade your microwave technology from your panel antennas to everything in your trucks. It's a costly endeavor, especially depending on the size of your fleet. So I think that'll take time. Unless the cost comes down, it'll take time for stations to find the capital to turn it over.
Right. I mean, because with all these things, you're talking about military-grade technology that's now being commercialized, and that does not start out cheap. Fabian, when we were talking about just IP transport, you said that you have a couple ideas about how that can be made better, maybe by going to a cloud-based model. We were chatting before the panel. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, I think what's exciting about IP contribution, other than what we've already covered, is the workflow, both inside of the news contribution and production side of things, but also we have to service all of these other platforms nowadays, and we like doing that because obviously it reaches a lot more audiences than we have before in areas that we maybe haven't serviced as well. So being able to do that in the future in a more cloud-based environment is a huge benefit. So, for example, being able to take the camera, assign it to a story. So if we're working in a story-centric environment where every story that we're covering is identified through our newsroom solution or newsroom software, being able to have that producer assigned to that story and the correspondent, and then as well as having the camera assigned to it. If there's then video coming in from that team, it immediately can be processed, transcoded, and distributed to various different platforms if we set it up properly. And considering our work is shifting more and more towards those other platforms over the long run, it doesn't make sense necessarily to keep a lot of on-prem equipment in the medium to far future. So that's where these cloud solutions could come in very, very handy. We're looking and talking to our various cellular bonded solution providers to figure out how they can play in that ecosystem. It's a big part of it. Wondering, be able to receive those cellular packs on a cloud serviced service, and being able to have them then distribute that to an Amazon AWS Elemental, which they recently merged, for example, and setting up workflows that automatically kick off. Those are all things that we're actively looking at and are excited about.
Okay. Just a couple more minutes before we open up to questions from the audience. But is there anything else, any other projects you're working on with your IP contribution, things that that you're actively involved in to make it better, to make it better? One of the things that's interesting talking to stations, that story I wrote, is that, where back in the day, if you had to get a piece of news video to 50 stations, you'd be going to a satellite. Now that's very easily done through public internet. Is there anything else that you think could be substantially improved with the bonded technology, whether it's going to cloud-based encoding to make it cheaper for you, or are you guys also actively looking at 5G that Fabian maybe mentioned?
Yeah, and I think integration into the cameras themselves is an important step. No more outboard gear or boxes or backpacks or even the camera-mounted back pieces, which are nice and everything, but to have these cell-bonded vendors deal directly with Panasonic's and Sony's to build their encoding software and the air cards directly into the cameras would be a great next step for this, and just have the crew go out with the camera and be live from wherever they are.
And a lot of these camera manufacturers, they've been hearing that from us over the last couple of years, and everybody is they're taking steps, I think, to put a lot of that technology in these cameras now. Between bonded along with QoS, quality of service, for that handshake as well. That helps to throttle that bandwidth. So 5G, you mentioned that as well. There are a couple of tests going on throughout the country. We're involved in one of them as well. So, look, we're very excited to see what that technology brings. The partner that we're working with, though, we've let them know that, look, kind of time slicing, making kind of a first responder priority for some of that bandwidth. I remember when we did this with 4G, we were kind of told that look, we're going to be able to carve out a certain part of this for you that nobody else can touch, and it never really did happen. So we're right back at it again with 5G and said, look, that's really got to happen for us this time. So, we'll see how it goes. I mean, so far the trials, they seem to be going pretty well, but we're excited. It's more bandwidth, and hopefully it comes cheaper at some point.
Michael has a mic if we have any questions from the audience. Nobody? Oh, we got one back there.
My question relates towards this. I bought a bunch of these with DJIs. It's the future. You put a DJI, you put this on there, and then there you go. The users hate it. They rather have a big camera on their shoulder, rather shoot the footage. They hate using this. They hate pushing buttons. They hate gathering the required materials to get it going. What do you say to them?
I think it probably depends on who the person is that is switching to that, right? So if it's a camera person, maybe they are going to miss a lot of features and a lot of capabilities that they had before. But a lot of our producers actually love using the iPhone. We have a few producers that go out with correspondents and shoot pretty much exclusively on iPhone, just because they don't have to lug around the gear, right? They don't even have to bring necessarily their bonded backpack, because they can just shoot it all and then send it in via FTP on the phone or Aspera some other accelerated solution. So I think that we see a lot of enthusiasm on our end for transitioning a lot of our contribution work to a phone. But of course, there's applications that the phone currently, of course, can't handle. I would say, though, that the the camera manufacturers are kind of in a tough spot because their expertise, of course, is not what the software developers for the apps that are on the iPhone have, right? So with the iPhone, you get all of the software where people can create niche pieces of niche apps that do amazing video processing and different types of niche things that you might want. The camera companies that we've seen over time, even though we've pushed them to build this technology and transmission technology into their cameras, are having a tough time kind of catching up to some of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I mean, I agree. I think, it takes a little while for that kind of level of acceptability, and I think it's going to depend on who it is that you're asking to use those. So a lot of the younger kids that are coming out of college, this is exactly what they've learned on. We've taught those guys, through the curriculum that, look, I mean, you can't just be a shooter nowadays. I mean, you've got to be able to shoot. You've got to be able to write. You've got to be able to edit. Again, a lot of my markets, they're one-man band MMJs, and coming right out of school, and they're big social media hounds. They're really used to those. You get into some of these markets, and again, if it's a traditional photographer, and now you suddenly take that piece of gear out of their hand and hand them this, and they're standing with all their other counterparts in the stations, and they've all got $40,000 cameras, and he's got an iPhone. There tends to be one of these where, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the truck, and I'm not going to make the shot, and they just won't show up. So.
At the same time, though, that was the same feeling when 6 trucks would roll up and you would come up with your backpack, and the other stations would look at you like, what's this amateur operation going on here? Now, look where we are with backpacks. So if that's your strategy, if that's the tool you have for the job, I would just stick to it. It's hard to see how technology can get there, but if it's the right thing, it'll come around.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, just to put a finer point. I think the age thing is definitely one thing. People being used to the technology that they have kind of grown up with or are learning on first. But actually, I mean, the producers I was speaking about earlier in early 50s. So I think it's really very much about the job that they're looking to do and using the best tools for that job. And for our pieces, it's usually they're coupled with a correspondent who is interviewing people. And it's all focused on what that correspondent is doing. So you don't need a lot of telephoto lenses for that. It's mainly wide angle work. So if it's already, that's what the iPhone does. It's a wide angle lens, pretty much. So it's great for that application. So it just depends on, right tool for the right job, really.
Thanks again.